Hello, welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host, Chris. This past week was the 103rd birthday of Jack the King Kirby. Now, I've made an episode before talking about his style, and many have discussed his influence. But this past week, I was enjoying one of my personal favorite books that he created, his adaptation of 2001, A Space Odyssey. That story is a psychedelic journey through mankind's evolution from primates into something approaching godhood. And it got me looking at Kirby's work through a new lens, wondering how did his religious beliefs inform his creative output? It would appear that Jack Kirby was a man of faith, and that it infused his work, especially after his time in the army serving in Europe during World War II. So today, I want to take a look at how, in my opinion, some of Jack Kirby's Jewish beliefs, as well as his interest in comparative religion, informed some of his artistic decisions. Looking at Jack Kirby's career in comics, he began working on some much more grounded stories than what would come later, working on street-level heroes, one step above pulp heroes like the Shadow and the Lone Ranger. He co-created Captain America in 1941, exhibiting wish fulfillment by having Captain America smash Hitler across the face on the cover of the first issue. He went on to work at National Publications, which eventually became DC Comics, with his art partner Joe Simon, where they revamped Sandman and Manhunter, and co-created characters like the Boy Commandos and the Newsboy Legion. And then Kirby was drafted into the Army during World War II. He would ultimately serve in the European theater, and when his commanding officer realized that he was an artist, Jack Kirby was assigned the duty of an advanced scout preparing maps. Jack Kirby fought in the Battle of the Bulge, and then was ultimately sent home due to a case of bad frostbite in his legs. Now, it's important to understand all this because it's going to frame my later argument. You see, Jack Kirby went to war and literally fought Nazis. He witnessed the worst that humanity has to offer. It's also important to note that he grew up poor in the Great Depression and would end up being a workaholic, a guy that cranked out more pages of artwork in a day than pretty much any other artist out there. In the art book Kirby 100, artist Ed Piskor said about Jack Kirby that, quote, "Poverty and violence is a good recipe to stay indoors and keep grinding." Ed hit the nail on the head, but Kirby was motivated not just to earn money, he had lived through the Great Depression after all, but also he was trying to find the good in humanity and to get in touch with the divine through his artwork. His wife Roz told the Kirby collector that Jack was a man of faith. He would sometimes draw for himself, and these pieces often incorporated his beliefs. For instance, he illustrated this Hanukkah card showing Fantastic Four member The Thing in a yarmulke reading Hebrew scripture. The Thing was a very personal character for Kirby, a tough guy who grew up poor in New York. He was not canonically Jewish until years after Kirby had passed away, but it was clear that Jack Kirby himself always saw The Thing as Jewish, like himself. And in 1970, Jack Kirby illustrated 3 pieces depicting God, which he actually kept in his own home. That was kind of rare for him to keep his own artwork. I'm going to come back to these pieces because they're very open to interpretation. After the war, Jack Kirby worked on various sci-fi and war titles, and even helped invent the popular romance comics genre in the 50s. But his biggest impact was felt in the 1960s, when he co-created most of Marvel's new superheroes, from the Fantastic Four to Hulk to the X-Men, Thor, and many, many more. Jack Kirby drew the characters larger than life, with fists like cinder blocks and bodies bursting towards the reader. His aesthetic and influence is undeniable. But let's take a look at how his designs were at least partially informed by his interest in religion. For instance, very few Marvel superheroes wear capes, but Thor does. In an interesting article by Zaya Grace back in 2015, he asserted that Jack Kirby gave capes to characters that were either divine or aspired to be divine. Aside from Thor, that included characters like Magneto, who saw himself as above humanity, and Doctor Doom, who presumed he was superior to everyone else. Zaya argues that Galactus and the Celestials don't have capes because they are above even gods, being elemental forces. It's an interesting idea. Meanwhile, the complex design of Galactus, the Inhumans, and the New Gods all feature design elements based on indigenous South American temples. When you look at the modern buildings of Bolivian architect Freddy Mamani, you will see similar ideas. That's because he's also drawing from the same native influences. I've noted before that if you look at Kirby's entire body of work, his stories about gods actually forms a loose narrative trilogy. His work on Thor brings up the concept of Ragnarok, the death of the gods. When he moved from Marvel to DC in 1971, he created the concept of the New Gods, which starts by showing the old gods dying, in what Kirby explicitly and interestingly chose to call a Holocaust. And finally, when he returned to Marvel in 1976, he created the Eternals, which focuses on the old gods returning to judge the newer ones. If you look carefully at the names he gave the New Gods and Eternals characters, they are adaptations of godly names. The New Gods is arguably Kirby's most personal work and has a basis in Hebrew scripture. Seraphim is similar to Seraphim, an angelic creature. High Father is named Isaiah, similar to the prophet Isaiah. Many of the Eternals have names reminiscent of Greek gods and mythology. For instance, Speedster Makari is similar to Mercury. Icarus and Circe have slightly different spellings of their names. Zurus has been mistaken for Zeus, and so on. Let's take a moment to focus on the characters and stories in New Gods. I believe that it is, as I just said, one of his most personal stories. He both wrote and illustrated it, one of his first times writing, and I think that it also shows us the best example of some insight into Jack Kirby's relationship with his faith. That said, this is all speculation. I'm not Jewish. I've tried to read up on it to back up the premises I'm about to assert, but your mileage may vary. Jews believe that God gave them free will, which allows for both good and evil in the world. Kirby's antagonist in his New Gods comics was Darkseid, who is searching for something called the anti-life equation, which would eliminate all free will and make everyone obey Darkseid. It's no great stretch to understand the Old Testament inspiration of the name of New Genesis, the home of the New Gods, while Darkseid rules over the disgusting apocalypse. Another key concept from New Gods is the unknowable source, which is the origin of power of the gods. In Kabbalah, a discipline in Jewish mysticism, there is a concept of rebirth, and key within that idea is that all souls return to their source. It seems likely that this informed the concept of the source in New Gods. In issue 26 of the Kirby Collector, author John Morrow posits that the Infinity Man in Kirby's related comic The Forever People could be based off of the idea of God from Kabbalah. There, God is known as Ein Sof, or the Infinite, before he self-actualizes himself as God. In Forever People #1, Infinity Man is introduced, and he can be granted additional infinite power by the Forever People themselves. Jack Kirby originally wanted to end the New Gods definitively. He wanted to give a conclusive ending where Darkseid battles his biological son Orion to their respective deaths. But DC Comics vetoed that idea. They didn't want him killing off these characters that he'd created. So he only published 11 issues of New Gods, and then DC had him create a graphic novel, their fourth graphic novel, which was called New Gods Hunger Dogs. It was designed to give a ending of sorts, although not kill off any of the main characters. And so at the end of Hunger Dogs, the New Gods go off in search of a new home after New Genesis has been destroyed. I think that that's a very clear allegory for the Jewish people who have historically always looked for a place to live and call home. When Jack Kirby returned to Marvel in the mid-70s, he didn't just create the Eternals, he also made the official adaptation of the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's easy to understand how the concepts there appealed to Kirby. In the story, mankind comes across gigantic monoliths at various points in time, and when they encounter these giant black obelisks, they are evolved. Ultimately, it is implied that the monoliths were placed there by unseen aliens who seek to bring mankind up to their celestial level. Not only did Jack Kirby adapt the book, he created an ongoing 2001 title. The first several issues are variations on the story of primitive dwellers encountering the monolith, and then a futuristic version of mankind encountering one again. The stories had beautiful cross-cut panels which shared body language for the transition, mirroring Stanley Kubrick's famous jump cut of a primate learning how to make a bone tool only for it to transition into a space station, representing man going from its first tools to its more modern versions. Of course, Jack Kirby also added more primitive beasts and space aliens along the way, but it represented his interest in godlike beings judging mankind. That's exactly what the Celestials, introduced in the Eternals, are. Gods above gods, silently judging us all, which relates to a Jewish belief system. Within Judaism, there are several types of adherents, with two of the most prominent being Orthodox and Conservative. They each view God in a different way. Orthodox Jews believe in having a relationship with God, but also believe that He is transcendent, unknowable, silently judging us on our deeds. Conservatives believe in God, but also believe that it's healthy to constantly question His nature and our relationship with Him. Both of those sound to me like Jack Kirby, but I'm really not sure exactly how he would have defined himself. So let's take a moment to jump back to those 3 images of God that I told you that he illustrated. In this first image, God is massive and his hair begins to entwine with the cosmos itself. There are also some sort of beings that I think he's creating. They look angelic since some of them seem to be blowing horns. This is a transcendent being. In the second image, the Lord sits to the left, and to the right, we see a planet composed of various concepts. I find this image to be the most inscrutable and tricky to understand. The orb may be comprised of other religions, and many of the faces look demonic. It's dripping something dark out of it as well. My best guess is this may involve some sort of concept about free will. The final image features God literally turning his back on his creations. Some seem angry and others worshipful. Perhaps this at least represents the expanse between us and a higher power, though there could be a lot more to it. Again, Jack Kirby's wife Roz has confirmed that Jack was a man of faith, and I think that much is clear. But as to his exact relationship with God, that's a lot trickier to define. Certainly, it's deeper and requires more analysis than I can accomplish in a 20-minute video. I can just ask some of the questions, point to some of the evidence. But I do think it's a question worth examining, because if we can figure that out, if we can understand Jack Kirby's relationship with faith, I think it can in turn help us understand his vast body of work even better. That's definitely worthwhile. Ultimately, the only thing I'm sure of is that Jack Kirby went to war and witnessed some true horrors. I'm convinced that he was definitely dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. And I believe that what he was trying to accomplish with his artwork was to focus on his belief that ultimately mankind was good, and that good will ultimately triumph over evil. I have a few more sources of information that I'd like to point you at, but first, let's take a quick look at what fan art came into the channel this week. AZ sent in this artwork featuring me as a superhero. You can see more by AZ on YouTube. EmptyBat677 illustrated me turning into a monster to explain why my episodes don't always come out weekly. Mark Taktak envisioned me as a transformer named Ultra Magazine. Jake Bowser shares with us a version of me where comic book ads all worked. Sebastian Cornes from Uruguay drew me as Uatu the Watcher. You can see more by Sebastian on Instagram. Jay Joseph imagined me and Infotron living as sea monkeys. You can find more by Jay on Instagram. Floorboards sent in this caricature of myself and Infotron. Eric Pinkay illustrated me as one of the kids from the Umbrella Academy. Dareops envisioned Infotron and myself as hard-boiled detectives. You can see more by Dareops on Instagram. Waste of Place from Russia shares this colorful artwork where I'm juggling balls of energy. Ephraim Crespo drew me backing up Batman as one of the Gotham City police. Hazem Carey sent in this piece where he envisions a skit where I'm bashing J. Michael Straczynski's Superman run. For the record, this is Hazem's opinion. I haven't read it. Gerard D'Souza imagined me as a sea monkey that used the Charles Atlas workout and who wears X-ray glasses. Christopher created this caricature of me. You can find more by him on Instagram. Brian Long illustrated me with my own mail-order gimmick. You can find Brian's book Imaginary Larry on Amazon. And finally, Xavier Villa 020 shares this drawing of me saying that I'm lazily investigating. Folks, I'm always happy to share any artwork that's directly related to comic tropes, and if you want to do that, just send it in to comictropes@gmail.com. I'll include it, and then anyone that enters gets a chance to win a Gachapon prize that comes out of the Gachapon machine that was donated by Lunar Shine Store. So, there were 16 entrants. Let's spin the ball hopper real quick and see who won the prize. Then I have a few places where you can read up on more Jack Kirby. I'm gonna just pop this open. Number 13. Number 13 was this piece of artwork. So, let's take a look at what Gachapon prize that you will get this week. All right. Gotcha, pon. That's what it means. Those are supposed to be sound effects. Okay. There we go. All right. What's in here? I think it says Marvel or something. Maybe that says Star Wars. What does that say? It doesn't say either. It says Dobutsuzu. Dobutsuzu. I don't know. Dobutsuzu. I can't tell what it is. Probably just some sort of a robot. I can't. It's just too. It's too opaque. I can't see it. So, I was saying that I was going to recommend some places where you can learn more about Jack Kirby and maybe specifically learn more about his interest in religion. The first place I'm going to aim you at is The Kirby Collector. That's a magazine published by Two Moros Publishing, so if you Google any of that, you're going to find a wealth of information. There are both physical copies of the magazine and a lot of the articles are online. So there's a lot of information there that you can read up on. And the second thing that's specific to what we're talking about today is going to be New Gods. I think that that's a good starting point. You know, you can start fresh. It's only 11 issues and a graphic novel, so actually not that much reading. I think that that's a good entry point for Jack Kirby, I really do. He does a lot of other more grounded stuff, you know, like Captain America, for instance, and Black Panther. Some of that's great, but we're talking more about his interest in various religions. So those are the two places I would aim you at. I appreciate you watching. Please consider hitting like and subscribe. That really helps the channel continue to grow, which is awesome. Also, I have a Patreon, and over there you can get all sorts of exclusive stuff. There's behind-the-scenes blog posts all the time. Sometimes I do commentary tracks on bad superhero movies, bonus episodes, or posting episodes a little early. Once you donate a certain amount, I've got these lovely enamel pins that you can get. I'll mail those out to you. So there's all sorts of stuff that I'm always trying to do there. But basically, it's just a good community to sort of engage in, talk comics, and anyway, it helps support the show. So I definitely would appreciate it if you would consider that. You know, there's tiers as low as $1 to join in the fun. I've got some other big names coming up, so I'm pretty excited about what's coming up. Thank you so much for being with me. It means a lot. Until I see you next time, keep reading comics.